A poor mechanic lets a well-dressed woman cut the line at his overflowing garage, unaware she owns the company that could change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The bell above the garage door jingled for the 5th time that morning, and Jake Morgan didn't even bother looking up. He already knew what he'd see. Another walk-in, another car with problems, another person hoping he could squeeze them in between the 3 jobs he was already juggling. His hands were slick with oil, elbow deep in the guts of a stubborn 98 F-150 that refused to start unless begged, bribed, or both. Outside, the line of cars stretched down the gravel lot, each one a ticking clock of customer impatience. Jake wiped his brow with a forearm already streaked in grease and leaned back with a grunt. The radio played static between old country songs, and the overhead fan clicked every third spin like it was counting down to collapse. "Jake, line 2's for you," called out Bree from the office, her voice half drowned by the whine of an air compressor. "Some guy says his transmission's talking back." "Tell it to write a letter," Jake muttered, sliding out from under the truck. His knees cracked like popcorn. He grabbed a rag, wiped off the worst of the grime, and made his way toward the ringing phone like a man heading to the gallows. Mondays were always like this, chaotic, relentless, loud, but they were his. This garage wasn't much to look at, with its dented siding and faded sign, but it was honest work. Jake knew every bolt and beam in the place. He knew which lift creaked too loud and which coffee mug didn't leak. He knew the customers by their engines and their stories. The phone didn't stop. The garage didn't pause. And neither did he. By 11, Jake had already fixed a battery cable, diagnosed a failing alternator, and turned down 2 more requests for just a quick look. There was no such thing as quick. Not here, not when you were the only mechanic people trusted within 30 miles. He stepped outside for a breath of air that didn't smell like gasoline and brake fluid, squinting up at the cloudless sky. Just another Monday. He didn't know it yet, but by tomorrow, everything about this little garage was going to change. The first thing Jake noticed was the way the car didn't sound right. Not broken, just too smooth. The engine purred instead of grumbled, the kind of low hum that came from machines worth more than the shop's monthly rent. It glided over the potholes in the gravel like they weren't even there, and pulled to a stop with the elegance of something that had no business being anywhere near Morgan's Auto. A sleek black sedan, shiny enough to reflect the faded sign above the shop, dark enough to hide its driver behind tinted windows. It didn't belong. Not in this neighborhood, not next to the rusty pickup with the busted tailgate or the minivan with the duct-taped bumper. The door opened. She stepped out like a question mark. In a place that only spoke in periods, tall, confident, red coat flowing around her like it had somewhere better to be. Her heels clicked against the cracked pavement. Her sunglasses were too big, too clean. Jake watched from the garage bay, rag in hand, heartbeat slow. "Hi," she said, glancing around like she half expected a valet. "Is this where I check in?" Jake blinked. "This isn't a dentist's office. You're already checked in." She smiled, amused instead of offended. "Fair enough." He wiped his hands a little cleaner and walked toward her, eyes flicking to the car. An Orion Vesta, if he wasn't mistaken. European, expensive, definitely not standard fare in Maple Hollow. "Having trouble?" he asked. "I don't know. It started making a noise, low and steady, like a hum, but not the good kind." Jake crouched slightly to listen. He didn't hear anything right away, but then again, most problems didn't announce themselves until it was too late. "You're not from around here," he said, not asking. She glanced at him, lowering her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, bright. "Is it that obvious?" Jake gestured toward the red coat, the car, the quiet poise she carried like armor. "You stick out a bit." She looked down at herself, then around the lot. "Good, I wasn't trying to blend in." And just like that, she handed over the keys without a flicker of doubt. Jake wasn't the kind of man who played favorites. He ran the garage like a tight line at the DMV. First come, first fixed. No shortcuts, no excuses. It kept things fair. It kept people from getting ugly. But as he stood there holding the keys the woman had just handed him, he felt the first pull of something that didn't follow the rules. There were 3 cars ahead of hers, 2 pickups and a station wagon, all with owners already grumbling about the wait. Jake could see old Mr. Greeley pacing by the vending machine, muttering about his rear axle. He saw Angela from the diner checking her watch for the 5th time. But this woman, she wasn't pacing, she wasn't complaining. She just stood there quietly, arms folded, eyes scanning the garage, like she wasn't here for repairs at all, but for something she hadn't quite named yet. Jake turned the key in his fingers, then looked at her. "It's going to be a bit. I've got a few ahead of you." She nodded. "Of course, I'll wait." No huff, no sigh, just patience. Real patience. The kind that felt like it had been practiced through 100 other harder moments. Jake looked at the sedan again, that low, clean design, the quiet tension in her shoulders. And then, without thinking too hard about it, he reached for the clipboard and bumped her name to the top. "Actually, he said, "I'll take a quick listen now, just to make sure it's not something urgent." She raised a brow, surprised. "You don't have to do that." He shrugged. "Sometimes I do." In the back, someone muttered, one of the regulars. He ignored it, slid into the driver's seat of her car, and turned the key. The engine came to life like silk on steel, and he listened, not for sound, but for feel, for the pulse of the machine. He didn't know why he bumped her up. Maybe it was the tired edge in her voice. Maybe it was how she didn't act like she was owed anything. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the way she looked at him like she saw more than just grease under his nails. It didn't take long. Just a loose heat shield rattling under the chassis. Nothing dangerous, nothing costly, but enough to make anyone unfamiliar with engine noise worry something worse was coming. Jake tightened the bolts, ran a quick systems check, and slid back out from beneath the sleek sedan in under 20 minutes. It wasn't a fix that should have earned him a second glance. He wiped his hands on his rag and stood, the gravel crunching softly under his boots. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the garage lot in patches. The woman had stayed exactly where he left her, leaning lightly against a post, arms crossed, her red coat catching the breeze like a flag from another world. "All set," Jake said, giving the fender a pat. "Nothing major, just a rattling heat shield. Should be quiet now." She pushed off the post and walked over, her heels clicking, her gaze never leaving his face. That was fast. Jake shrugged. Fast doesn't always mean good, but in this case, it does. She smiled, small, subtle, the kind of smile people save for those who surprise them. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a slim leather wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Jake waved her off before she could even open it. "Don't worry about it." Her brow furrowed. "Really?" Wasn't even a real fix, just tighten some bolts, not worth the paperwork. She hesitated, the wallet still in her hand, now hanging loosely by her side. Then she tucked it away and looked at him, slower this time, more thoughtful. "Thank you," she said. And that was all. No business card, no offer to pay double. Just 2 words, honest, clear, and aimed straight at something deeper than his pride. Jake nodded, not sure what else to say. She stepped into the car, started the engine, and rolled down the window. "You're good at what you do." Then she drove off, the car gliding away in that same quiet way it had arrived. Jake stood there for a beat longer than usual, the scent of heated asphalt in the air, wondering why her thank you felt heavier than any tip ever had. The week unfolded like any other, predictable, greasy, and loud in all the usual ways. Jake's hands stayed busy, his boots scuffed the same oil-stained paths from bay to bench, and the garage hummed its constant working rhythm. Rotors were turned, tires were rotated, engines complained, and Jake listened. But behind every gear change and torque wrench click, her face floated like a smudge on a window he couldn't quite wipe clean. He didn't talk about it. Not to Bree, not to the guys. That wasn't his style. And besides, what was there to say? A woman in a red coat came in, skipped the line, said thank you, and vanished. End of story. Only it didn't feel like the end. He caught himself looking up every time a black car pulled into the lot, even if it was just a dusty Camry or a delivery truck. At one point he thought he saw her again through the window, only to realize it was the insurance rep with a similar haircut and none of the gravity. She hadn't left a name, no appointment, no reason to come back. Still, he kept the clipboard corner a little cleaner than usual, just in case. The radio played old blues that week, something slow, something that matched the way Jake found himself staring out the garage door between jobs longer than he meant to. He wasn't moping. He wasn't obsessed. It was more like wondering who she was, what kind of life she had, why someone with money in her veins didn't flinch at a dusty chair or a busted vending machine. Wednesday, Bree noticed, she was sharp like that. "You keep polishing that wrench like it's going to answer you back," she said, sipping her coffee. Jake just smirked, kept wiping. He told himself it was nothing. Just a moment like all the others that passed through the shop. Customers came and went. He fixed things. That's what he did. But somewhere between the late-night oil changes and the quiet clatter of falling sockets, the thought of her kept showing up. Uninvited. Persistent. The red coat. The eyes. The thank you that didn't feel routine. Jake didn't know it yet, but the silence between that goodbye and the next hello was already shifting something in his world. It started like any other notification, just a little ping from the garage's dusty Yelp page. Jake almost didn't see it. He wasn't the kind of guy who checked reviews. Customers either came back or they didn't. That was the only feedback that ever mattered. But Bree saw it first. She was the one who kept their online presence barely breathing, and she waved him over during a slow hour between break jobs. "Hey, you might want to read this?" Jake wiped his hands on a towel and leaned over the desk. Bree turned the screen toward him, her brow arched. The review wasn't long, but it hit like a hammer in slow motion. "I came into Morgan's Auto with a problem no one else would have taken seriously. I wasn't from town. I didn't look like I belonged. But Jake didn't care. He fixed what was wrong without a fuss, refused my money, and treated me like a neighbor. Not a customer, not a number, just a person. This shop runs on honesty, and in a world full of overpriced promises, that's the rarest service of all. I'd trust Jake Morgan with more than my car." There was no name attached, just a 5-star rating and the initials MS. Jake stared at it, expression unreadable. He read it again, then once more, slower. "Think it's her?" Bree asked, tilting her head. He didn't answer. The next day the phones rang more than usual. Not frantic, not flooded, just more. A woman from the next county over asked if Jake was available for diagnostics. A retired professor said he'd driven 2 hours just to see the mechanic from the internet. Someone emailed asking if Jake gave lectures. That one made Bree laugh until she spilled her coffee. But Jake didn't laugh. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted under his boots, like the ground was moving, but only just enough to make you wonder if you imagined it. He didn't chase the attention, didn't post a reply. But he printed the review and slipped it into the drawer by his workbench, behind an old receipt and a screwdriver that didn't fit anything anymore. He didn't need recognition, never had. Still, he read that last line one more time before closing the drawer. "I'd trust Jake Morgan with more than my car." He didn't know it yet, but someone already was. Jake was elbow-deep in a carburetor when he saw it. Another black sedan, but this one wasn't the same make. Sleeker, newer, different badge. He barely glanced at first. Just another customer. Probably here for a tire rotation or something they Googled wrong. But then the door opened. The red coat was gone. This time she wore jeans, a dark sweater, and her hair was pulled into a loose braid that looked too casual to be accidental. She stepped out slower than before, like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to be there. Jake stood upright, wiped his hands on the towel at his hip, and blinked into the sun. She smiled, small, almost cautious. "Still fixing things?" He smirked. "Only the stuff that doesn't fix itself." She approached, looking around the garage like she was trying to see if anything had changed. It hadn't. Same cracked concrete, same creaky ceiling fan, same faded coffee stain on the front desk. "I was in the area," she said. "Thought I'd stop by." Jake raised a brow. "You drive a $100,000 car to check on a $30 repair?" Her eyes sparked, but she didn't flinch. "Maybe I just wanted to see if you'd remember me." He tilted his head. "Hard to forget the only customer who thanked me like it mattered." That made her pause. For a moment something passed between them, some quiet recognition that neither of them quite knew what to do with. She glanced at her car. "Truth is, I do have a question." Jake folded his arms. "Let's hear it." If someone had a chance to help a place like this, to make it better without changing what made it good, would that be interfering? He studied her. "That depends on whether it's about the place or the person." She didn't answer right away, just nodded, slowly. "That's fair." Then she looked around again, at the cars, the clutter, the quiet order in the chaos. "I'll be back," she said, walking to her car. "You just got here," Jake called after her. She smiled over her shoulder. "Yeah, but I think we're just getting started." And with that she drove off again, different car, same storm in her eyes. The second time she came, it wasn't her car that needed attention, it was her. No problem to fix, no rattle to chase, just her walking in mid-afternoon with 2 coffees in hand and a question in her eyes Jake couldn't quite read. "Thought you might like a break," she said, holding out a cup like it was a peace offering. Jake hesitated only a second before taking it. "You always bring coffee when you're not in trouble?" She grinned. "Only for mechanics who fix things without charging." They ended up in the break room, if you could call it that. It was more of a broom closet with a dented table, a microwave from the early 2000s, and a fridge that buzzed louder than it cooled. Still, it was quiet, and it was theirs for the moment. She sat across from him, hands wrapped around her cup. Jake leaned back, boots crossed at the ankle, arms resting easy, but his mind was ticking faster than usual. "So," he said, "what brings a mystery woman with 2 luxury cars and no last name back to my humble little shop?" She sipped her coffee. "Maybe I like the way you see people." Jake raised a brow. "That supposed to be a compliment or a warning?" "Both," she said, laughing softly. Then quieter. "Most people only look at what's obvious. You didn't." The conversation drifted after that, not rushed, not rehearsed. They talked about carburetors and combustion engines, about how cars used to be simpler, how people were too. She mentioned growing up around machines. Her grandfather had been a mechanic, though she'd never learned to fix anything herself. Jake told her about his first car, a rusted-out Nova he rebuilt at 17 with nothing but time and borrowed tools. She listened like every detail mattered. Somewhere between talk of gear ratios and stubborn bolts things shifted. She asked about the town, about why he never left. Jake shrugged. "Roots are heavy. Sometimes that's a good thing." She nodded slowly, eyes distant. "And sometimes they're chains." He still didn't know her last name, but he knew the look on her face, like she was searching for something honest, something real, and maybe, just maybe, she thought she'd found a piece of it here. It was Thursday morning when the man in the suit walked in, sharp navy blazer, polished shoes that had never touched gravel, and a phone in one hand like it was a permanent part of him. He didn't belong, and everyone in the shop knew it. The regulars went quiet. Bree looked up from the front desk with a polite but suspicious smile. Jake, under the hood of a Civic, kept working, but angled his ear toward the conversation. The man didn't ask for a quote, didn't say anything about a car. He adjusted his cufflinks and leaned slightly over the counter, calm but deliberate. "I'm looking for Jake Morgan," he said. Bree's fingers hovered over the keyboard. May I ask what this is about?" The man smiled in the way people do when they think charm is currency. "Just a few questions. I represent a group that's exploring local opportunities. This shop came recommended." Jake straightened up slowly, wiped his hands on a rag, and stepped into the office before Bree could answer. "You found him," he said. The man turned. His eyes flicked down to Jake's grease-stained shirt, then back up to his face. "Ah, Mr. Morgan, a pleasure." Jake didn't offer his hand. "Depends on the questions." The man chuckled. "Fair enough. I'll be brief." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek card. Just a name, a company logo, and a number. Jake didn't recognize the brand, but something about it felt expensive. "We've been surveying a few businesses in the area, looking into future investments, potential acquisitions. Your shop caught some interest." Jake blinked. "Why, it's a garage, not a gold mine." "Your reputation," the man said smoothly. "Integrity, local trust. And recently you've been getting attention." Jake's jaw tightened. "I run this place. It's not for sale." The man raised a hand. "Of course, this is purely exploratory, just gathering information. Ownership, partnerships, management structure, the usual." Jake stared at him. "Who sent you?" The man smiled again. "Let's just say someone with an interest in this town and in you." Then, as quickly as he arrived, he tucked his card away and left. No answers, just a trail of questions and polished footprints on the workshop floor. Jake watched him go, that tight knot in his gut twisting just a little harder. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. By Monday, something felt wrong. Not loud wrong, not obvious wrong, but off in the way old engines hum just slightly out of tune before they break. The guys at the shop noticed it first. Dennis, who'd been with Jake since the days of cash-only repairs and handwritten receipts, kept shooting glances at the front office. Bree was quieter than usual, typing longer emails and ending more phone calls with, "Yes, I'll tell him." The usual rhythm was missing. Jake could feel it in the silence between impact wrench bursts and the way no one turned the radio on. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. "Did you hear the owner might be selling?" "Why now? We've been barely breaking even for years." "I heard someone came in asking about Jake." Jake tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on the Dodge and Bay 2 with a faulty starter, on the service orders stacking up like always, but the truth kept bleeding in through the cracks. By noon, he'd had enough. He found Bree in the office, her coffee untouched, her eyes darting from screen to screen. "Is there something I should know?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She hesitated, just long enough for him to know the answer. "Jake," she began, voice low, "Mr. Halverson's been getting calls, serious ones, about buying the shop." Jake frowned. "Halverson hasn't set foot in this garage in 2 years. Why the sudden interest in selling?" Bree lowered her voice. "I don't think it's about the garage, Jake. I think it's about you." The words hit harder than he expected. He stepped back slightly as if someone had thrown a wrench at his chest. "Me?" "There's a lot of buzz lately. That review, people asking for you by name. Some suit came in last week asking about your work. I think someone sees value here, but not in the tools, in the hands using them." Jake said nothing, just stared past her into the lot where his reflection wavered in the glass. He'd worked his whole life to be invisible, just another guy who fixed cars. But somehow, quietly, he'd become the one everyone was watching. And he wasn't sure if that was a promotion or a warning. Jake didn't hear it from Bree, didn't hear it from Dennis, or one of the other guys either. He heard it from a customer, a regular named Carla, who brought her Corolla in for oil changes like clockwork every 3 months. She walked in with her usual smile and handed over her keys, then tilted her head. "So? Congratulations, I guess." Jake blinked. "For what?" Carla frowned. "You didn't hear? Heard the place got bought. Guy at the gas station said the garage changed hands." Jake froze. the keys still dangling between his fingers. His stomach dropped like a lift with no locks. He didn't finish the oil change. He didn't even tell Bree where he was going. He stormed into the back office and pulled out his phone, dialing Halverson's number with grease still on his palms. It rang once, twice, then, "Jake," came the voice, casual, like they'd spoken yesterday. "Is it true?" Jake asked, no greeting. "Did you sell the shop?" There was a pause, a beat of silence thick with decisions already made. "Yes," Halverson said finally. "The paperwork's done. The deal's clean. The buyer wanted a quiet transfer, so I didn't say anything until it was finalized." Jake's jaw clenched. "And you didn't think I should know?" Another pause. "The buyer specifically asked to keep you on, said you were essential." Jake swallowed hard. "Who is it?" "They'll be in touch. All I can tell you is they didn't care about the building. They cared about the man running it. You." Jake stood in the quiet of the office, the hum of the garage fading behind the closed door. His whole life had lived inside these walls. Every busted knuckle, every long night, every broken thing he managed to put back together. Now it belonged to someone else. But they wanted him to stay. He should have felt grateful. Instead, all he felt was the weight of a question. What kind of person buys a garage not for the shop, but for the man turning the wrenches inside it? It was raining when she walked in again. Not a storm, just that steady kind of drizzle that made everything look soft around the edges. The bell above the garage door jingled as usual, but this time it felt louder, like it was announcing something more than just another customer. Jake looked up from the counter where he'd been pretending to do inventory and saw her standing there, umbrella closed at her side, rain clinging to her sweater like reluctant memories. No red coat this time, just denim, boots, and the same sharp eyes that had never quite left his mind. He straightened. "Here for coffee or another repair?" Her smile was quiet, measured. "Neither." She stepped forward, water pooling beneath her boots, and reached into her bag. What she pulled out wasn't keys. It was a folder, thick, crisp. "I believe you've been wondering who bought this place." Jake stared at it. Then at her. "You?" She nodded. "Me." He didn't speak for a moment, didn't move. Something between disbelief and déjà vu settled in the air. "I had a feeling you might come back," he muttered, leaning against the desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. She placed the folder gently on the counter. When someone shows you what real character looks like, you pay attention, and when you find something rare, you don't let it go. Jake opened the folder slowly. Legal language, transfer deeds, her signature, his name underlined as manager. "You bought the shop," he said, the words like gravel in his throat. "For what? A project? A tax write-off?" She looked him in the eye. "For the same reason you fixed my car without charging me, because it was the right thing to do." Silence stretched between them, thick and honest. "You don't even know me," he said. Her voice didn't waver. "I know enough. I know the kind of man who puts others first, who fixes more than engines, and I want to build something that runs on that." Jake exhaled slowly. He'd seen a lot of things walk into that garage, but never his future, dressed in rain and reason, asking him to stay. Jake didn't know where to start. The rain had quieted, but the storm inside him hadn't. The folder still sat open on the counter, ink still drying on the papers that spelled out a future he hadn't asked for. She stood across from him, calm as ever. But her eyes held something deeper now, something that said this wasn't just about business. "So you bought the shop," he said slowly. "But you didn't just wake up and decide that, did you?" She smiled, faint and deliberate. "No, I did my homework." He folded his arms, leaning back slightly. "What kind of homework?" She took a breath. "My name's Malene Sinclair." The name didn't hit right away. It sounded familiar in a way that felt distant, like something he'd heard in a headline or seen on the bottom of a brochure. Then it clicked. "Sinclair," he repeated. "As in Sinclair Motors? She nodded. That's me. CEO, technically, though I prefer hands-on. Jake stared at her. The woman in the red coat. The one who let him fix her heat shield. The one who thanked him without flashing her wallet. She ran one of the largest luxury car companies in the country. "And you've been watching me?" he asked, still trying to piece the thing together. "Not in a creepy way," she said, her voice breaking into a laugh that softened the air between them. "After that day I looked you up, read the reviews, talked to a few folks in town, watched how you worked when you didn't know anyone was watching. And I saw something that doesn't exist on spreadsheets." Jake shook his head slowly. "Why me?" "Because I've spent years in boardrooms full of polished lies. And then I met a man who fixed my car, refused my money, and told me to pay it forward. That's someone I want running a place with my name attached to it." Jake looked down at his hands, calloused, stained, rough from 1,000 small repairs. Then he looked back at her. "You're serious about this?" Malene nodded. "Dead serious." For the first time in a long while, Jake felt something he didn't quite recognize. Wanted. Not for what he could fix, but for who he was when no one was watching. Jake stood in the middle of the garage like a man caught between gears. The place looked the same clatter, same oil stains, same echo of a socket wrench dropped on concrete. But everything felt different now. The weight of Malene's words hadn't left him. Her offer still hung in the air, thick with opportunity and risk. She hadn't sugarcoated it. "Manager," she'd said, like it was a done deal. Full benefits, salary. A say in the future of the shop. No more chasing late invoices or hoping the overhead lights didn't burn out before payday. She laid it out plainly, cleanly, like it wasn't a gamble, but a gift. Jake didn't answer right away. He told her he needed time, though he wasn't sure how much time could make a decision like that easier. He walked the garage after closing that night, alone with the hum of quiet tools and the familiar scent of motor oil and rust. His hands touched the fender of an old Buick he'd been working on all week, as if the metal could ground him. This shop was more than a job. It was his story. Every scar on the lift, every dent in the workbench, every late-night fix when no one else showed up. He'd built his name here, slowly, quietly, with grease under his nails and pride in every bolt turned right. But to run it, to lead it under her name, with her watching from skyscrapers and strategy meetings, that was different. That wasn't fixing cars. That was steering lives. And he wasn't sure if he belonged behind the wheel of something that big. Bree caught him pacing in the break room later, mug in hand. "You're thinking too loud," she said. Jake looked up. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this." She shrugged. "You've been running this place for years, Jake. Only difference is now someone's finally offering to pay you like it." He half smiled, half frowned. "It's not just the money, it's what it means." Bree sipped her coffee. "Then maybe it's time to ask yourself what you want it to mean." Jake looked out the window into the dark lot. He still hadn't decided, but for the first time in years, he realized the next move was entirely his. The next morning, the shop felt different. Not louder, not colder, just heavier, like the air carried something unsaid. Jake could feel it before he even stepped through the garage door. It was in the way Dennis didn't look up from the undercarriage he was inspecting, in the way Miguel's usual morning boss came out quieter, thinner. Bree handed him the schedule without her usual sarcasm. She didn't say much, just slid the clipboard over and walked back to her desk. Jake knew that silence. It wasn't about respect, it was about doubt. Word had spread fast. By lunch, everyone knew. Jake was the new manager. Not Halverson, not some outsider. Jake, the guy who'd always been one of them, the guy who used to hand out beers in the back lot after closing and crack jokes while covered in axle grease. Now he was the one with the title, and a lot of the guys weren't sure what to do with that. "You must have done something right," muttered Dennis, not quite looking at him. Jake raised a brow. "Meaning?" Dennis shrugged. tightening a bolt with more force than necessary. "Just saying, most folks don't get promoted when the boss doesn't even know their last name," Miguel added without glancing up. "She shows up twice. Suddenly you're in charge. That's some timing." Jake took the hit without reacting. He wasn't going to defend something he didn't ask for, but it stung. Not because they were wrong, but because part of him wondered the same thing. Did she see something in him no one else had? Or had he just been in the right place at the right time with clean hands and a good attitude? That night, he stayed late. Not to prove anything, just to think. He walked the bays alone, ran his fingers over the workbenches, stared at the tools hanging in their usual places like they were waiting for someone more qualified. Jake wasn't afraid of hard work. He'd earned every scar on his hands. But this role, this shift, he wasn't sure if he'd climbed a ladder or been handed one, and in the quiet hum of the closed garage, that doubt echoed louder than any engine. The coffee tasted the same, but everything else felt different. Jake stood outside the garage for a full minute before walking in, like crossing that threshold made the weight on his shoulders official. For years he'd entered this building as one of the crew, wrench in hand, head down, grease under every fingernail. But today, there was no toolbox at his side, no service order in his hand, just a clipboard and a title that didn't feel like his yet. Inside, the hum of the shop was already underway. Bree was on the phone, rattling off parts like a second language. Dennis had his head buried in a Honda. Miguel was realigning tires on Bay 3. Everything looked normal, but when Jake walked in, the air shifted, just enough for him to feel it. He cleared his throat, stepping to the center of the floor. "Morning, everyone." A few muttered replies. Dennis didn't look up. Jake held the clipboard tighter than he meant to. "Got a few changes today, starting with scheduling. Gonna test a new rotation. Give everyone a little more breathing room where I can." No one said anything, and he pressed on. "I know this is new and weird. Believe me, it's weird for me too, but I'm not here to be anyone's boss. I'm here to keep this place running the way it always has. Honest work, fair jobs, no shortcuts." Bree stepped beside him, handing out the new assignments. Jake caught her glance, half support, half, "Let's see if they follow you." By noon, the rhythm had found its footing, sort of. Jake jumped in on a diagnostic when Miguel got backed up, offered to run for parts when the delivery was late. He didn't hide in the office. He didn't bark orders. He worked, like always. But even then, the looks didn't stop. Not angry, just cautious, measured. Like they were waiting to see if this version of Jake, the one in charge, was still the man they'd trusted before. By closing time, the garage was quiet again. Tools cleaned, bays swept. Jake stood alone in the break room, staring at his name on the new office door. He wasn't just another set of hands anymore. He was the one they'd follow, or the one they'd leave behind. Jake had always known machines better than people. Engines made sense. They rattled when something was wrong, leaked when they were hurt, refused to start when mistreated. People? They smiled when they were angry, nodded when they didn't agree, said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. And now somehow it was his job to lead them. The first week as manager hit harder than a seized piston. Every decision he made, every change he suggested, felt like stepping onto a frozen lake, thin, uncertain, one crack away from going under. He tried to keep things fair, balanced the schedule, gave Dennis every third Friday off, like he used to grumble about, ordered Miguel that new lift jack he'd been eyeing for months. But even with the effort, Jake felt the gap growing. No one was rude, but they weren't warm either. Conversation slowed when he entered the room. Jokes that used to fly freely now ended in awkward silence. Jake wasn't one of them anymore. He was above them, whether he wanted to be or not. He started second-guessing everything. Should he have stayed late to finish that brake job himself? Should he have corrected Bree in front of the customer or pulled her aside? Should he have eaten lunch in the break room instead of alone in the office? The worst moment came on a Wednesday, A customer's car came back with a loose caliper, Jake's final sign-off. He hadn't caught it. Miguel had. When Jake tried to thank him, Miguel shrugged. Just doing the job, like I always did. The words stung more than they should have. That night, Jake sat alone at the desk, the shop lights humming above. He stared at the work orders piled in front of him and wondered if fixing people meant learning a different kind of wrench, one that adjusted trust instead of timing belts. He didn't want to be a boss. He wanted to be the guy everyone trusted when things got messy. But maybe, just maybe, that meant stepping into the discomfort, speaking louder, listening harder, leading not because he was the manager, but because they needed someone worth following. She started showing up around closing time, never announced, never in a rush. Sometimes it was just for 10 minutes, sometimes a whole hour. Always after the tools were hung up and the bay doors were pulled shut when the fluorescent lights buzzed low and the air in the garage finally started to cool. Malene didn't bring contracts or numbers. She brought coffee or takeout, or once a bottle of root beer she claimed was the good kind. Jake didn't argue. He just grabbed 2 chairs, one for her, one for him, and they'd sit near the open garage door like old friends with nowhere urgent to be. At first, the conversations were simple. "How's the crew adjusting?" she'd ask. "Still feeling me out," Jake would say. "Like I might change the locks if they sneeze wrong." She laughed, not politely, honestly. But after a few visits, things began to shift. The questions got softer. The silences got longer. Jake learned she hated the sound of ticking clocks, that she used to rebuild engines with her grandfather in a barn that smelled like pine shavings and diesel, that she missed it, missed being known for more than balance sheets and executive titles. Malene learned about Jake's late father, about the way he used to test Jake by pulling spark plugs just enough to cause trouble, then watching him figure it out. She learned Jake never planned to run anything bigger than his own life, and now here he was, managing people, making schedules, trying not to drown in second guesses. They didn't flirt. Not exactly. But there was something else in the way they talked, something unspoken but present, like static in the space between words. One night, as the crickets started humming and the streetlights flickered on, she asked quietly, "You ever think about leaving this place? Doing something bigger?" Jake sipped his coffee, thought for a long second. "This shop saved me," he said. "I don't need bigger, I just want better." She looked at him then, eyes soft, like she was searching for a part of herself in his answer. And in the hush of that shared moment, the line between owner and employee, stranger and friend, started to quietly disappear. It started as a passing thought, something Jake muttered to himself while replacing a filter on a beat-up minivan that had seen better decades. The mom who owned it had been wrangling 2 toddlers in mismatched boots, one of them crying over a lost toy, the other trying to feed a gummy bear to the shop cat. She'd apologized 3 times for not being able to afford a full inspection, said she'd just get by till next paycheck. Jake had nodded, but it stuck with him. That night, with the shop lights dim and a cold soda sweating in his hand, he said it out loud. "You ever think about just giving something away?" Malene looked up from the chair across from him, eyebrow raised. "Like what?" "Oil changes," Jake said. "For single parents, just 1 Saturday a month. No strings, no forms, just show up and we take care of it." She blinked. "Free?" He nodded. "Yeah, we toss away more unused filters in a month than we like to admit, and half the guys here would stay late if I asked. I know we're not a charity, but feels like we could be something better than just a business." Malene leaned back in her chair, watching him for a long moment. Then quietly she said, "Let's do it." Jake looked at her. "Seriously?" She smiled. "You're the kind of mechanic I wish every city had. If you believe this town needs it, I'll back it." By the end of the week, Bree had made flyers. Miguel volunteered to bring donuts, and Dennis, grumpy old Dennis, agreed to handle intake as long as there's decent coffee. They called it Second Saturday. The first morning, 10 cars showed up, moms in hoodies, dads who looked like they hadn't had a break in weeks. Jake shook hands, changed oil, answered questions no one else had time for. And Malene? She wore a faded t-shirt, poured coffee, and held a baby so a woman could sit for 5 minutes without a crying child on her hip. By noon, the bays were quiet again, but something had shifted. The town noticed. Jake noticed. And when he looked over at Malene, laughing with a toddler who'd smeared grease on her sleeve, he realized something else. This wasn't just her garage now. It was becoming their gift. The trouble didn't come loud. It came quiet. Just a few missing tools at first. A socket wrench out of place. A torque gauge left half-calibrated. Jake chalked it up to forgetfulness. It happened in busy shops. People rushed. Things got shuffled. But then a service order disappeared. A customer called, angry their car hadn't been touched. Jake checked the log. Someone had marked it complete. Someone who never touched the vehicle. At first, he didn't want to believe it. This crew was family. He'd bled beside these guys, laughed with them, stayed late on Christmas Eve to make sure Angela's minivan could get her to her mom's. But it wasn't all of them. It was one, Mark. Mark had always been sharp with tools and sharper with his tongue. Older than Jake by a decade. Bitter since Halverson passed him up for a lead role 2 years ago. Back then, Jake had stood up for him. Told Halverson Mark deserved a shot. Halverson hadn't listened. And now it seemed Mark hadn't forgotten. The new hierarchy made it worse. Jake wasn't just a co-worker anymore. He was the guy who got handed the reins without ever asking. And Mark? He made his opinions known, in little ways. "Must be nice," he muttered, one morning, loud enough for Miguel to hear. "Some people climb ladders, others just get carried." Jake let it slide, once, twice. But when a customer came back with a stripped oil pan Jake hadn't touched, and the logs accidentally had Jake's initials, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He pulled Mark aside, just the two of them, quiet, no audience. "You got a problem with me?" Jake asked, voice low but steady. Mark crossed his arms. "I got a problem with people who pretend they earned something just because they were standing in the right place." Jake nodded. "Then say it, to my face. Don't sabotage the work. That hurts the people we serve, not just me." Mark didn't answer, just walked out of the office, wrench still in hand. Jake stood there for a long while. This was the part of leadership no one warned you about. You don't just fix engines, you fix trust. And some people don't want to be fixed. It was a Tuesday when it happened, the kind of day that felt normal right up until everything cracked. The car was a sleek, custom-built Electra XR, the kind of machine you didn't usually see outside city limits. The customer, Vincent Calloway, was all silk and sunglasses, the type who didn't shake hands but expected respect the moment he stepped out of his car. He didn't want small talk. He wanted results. The engine had a sputter under acceleration, and he was convinced it was the timing belt. Jake disagreed, thought it was an airflow issue, maybe a misfire. He listened, ran diagnostics, and went with his gut. They replaced the sensors, calibrated the system. Jake signed off on the job himself, double-checked every line. But when Calloway came back 2 days later, red-faced and roaring about a blown head gasket and unauthorized tampering, the front office froze. He didn't yell, he threatened. "I've already called my attorney. I'll ruin this place if I have to." Jake took the heat. He didn't push it on Miguel, who helped with the install. Didn't mention Mark, who'd double-checked the specs. He stood at the front counter and absorbed every word, even when the man slammed his hand on the desk and demanded full reimbursement plus damages. Bree tried to de-escalate, offered coffee, a seat, anything. Nothing helped. After Calloway stormed out, Jake disappeared into the back office. He sat at the desk, hands gripping the edge so tight his knuckles went white. It wasn't just about the repair. It was what it represented. His name was on that sign now, his title on the books, and if one mistake, one judgment call, brought the whole thing down, then maybe he wasn't built for this after all. He didn't say anything to the crew, just sat in silence long after the garage lights dimmed and the rest of the crew had gone home. Malene showed up just before closing, wordless at first. She sat across from him, watching the silence swallow him. He finally spoke. "I made the wrong call." She nodded. "Then we make it right." Jake looked at her. "Even if it costs the shop?" She didn't blink. "A shop can be rebuilt, trust can't. That's why I chose you." And just like that, the meltdown wasn't just about the mistake. It became a measure of who he'd be when things broke down, because anyone can lead when the road's smooth. It's who you are when it all falls apart that writes the real story. The article hit the local news before noon, a headline crafted for clicks, not truth. High-end client claims local garage ruined rare vehicle. Underneath, a grainy photo of the shop's sign, Jake's name in the second paragraph, and enough vague outrage to stir up comment section pitchforks. The phones rang more than usual, not with appointments, just curious voices asking if that was the place, or if the mechanic really messed up a six-figure car. Jake barely made it through 2 repairs before his hands started shaking. The worst part wasn't the story, it was the silence from his crew. Not anger, not support, just caution. Everyone waiting to see what Malene would do. By late afternoon, she walked in with purpose. No red coat, no boardroom air, just jeans, boots, and a jaw set like concrete. She went straight to Bree. "Call the Gazette," she said calmly. "We're issuing a statement." Jake stood nearby, watching. "You don't have to." She turned to him. "Yes, I do." 2 hours later, the local paper posted an update online. A quote at the top, bold and clear. "I trust Jake Morgan. I trust his integrity, his judgment, and his years of service to this town. Morgan's Auto is built on more than tools and lifts. It's built on people who show up when it's hard. That's why I invested in it. That's why I stand by him." Malene Sinclair, the CEO, Sinclair Motors. The phones kept ringing, but the tone shifted. "Tell Jake we've got his back. Place fixed my truck last year, flawless. I don't care what the papers say, he's the only one who touches my car." The next day, Jake found her in the break room with 2 coffees and a smirk. "I didn't do it to save your job," she said. "I did it because leadership doesn't mean silence." Jake took the coffee, the warmth soaking into fingers that had been clenched for 2 days straight. "You put your name on me," he said, voice low. She met his eyes. "Only because you've already built something worth standing behind." And just like that, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel so heavy, because now it wasn't his to carry alone. The sky hung low and heavy that night, stars tucked behind clouds like secrets not ready to be told. The garage was closed, the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow from the break room window. Jake sat on the back steps, boots planted on cracked concrete, a bottle of something cold in one hand and silence in the other. Malene joined him without a word. She handed him another drink, something local, something strong, and settled beside him. No red coat, no title, just her. Knees pulled in slightly, hair loose from the long day. They sat for a while, saying nothing, just the quiet clink of bottles and the distant hum of night traffic. "You ever think about what this place is worth?" she asked softly, not looking at him. Jake chuckled. "As in market value? Or the number of busted knuckles it took to keep it running?" She smiled at that, but then her voice shifted, lower, steadier. "Everyone thinks I bought this garage as some PR move. Community roots, humble investment, feel-good narrative for the board. Didn't you?" She took a long sip before answering. "I bought it because it reminded me of something I forgot I loved. My grandfather had a shop just like this one. Wood panel walls, metal bins full of washers, no one ever organized. He smelled like grease and coffee, fixed more hearts than he did engines, I think." Jake glanced over at her, eyes narrowing with something softer than curiosity. "After he died," she continued, "I buried myself in numbers and glass towers. I forgot what honest work looked like. Then I broke down outside a town no one writes about. And a man with calloused hands and quiet eyes told me to pay it forward, like it was just something people did. Jake didn't speak. He couldn't. Malene turned to him. That's why I bought it. Not for the garage, for the man who runs it, for the kind of decency that doesn't market well, but holds everything together. He looked down at the bottle, then at her. I'm not a symbol, Malene. I'm just trying to keep things from falling apart. She leaned closer, her voice nearly a whisper. And that's exactly why you matter. And for the first time, sitting under a clouded sky with nothing to prove, Jake let that truth settle somewhere deep in his chest, where doubt had lived too long. Jake hadn't looked in the old lockbox in years. It lived on the top shelf of a cabinet in the corner of his office, half buried under repair manuals and receipts so faded they might as well have been blank. But something about that night with Malene, something in the way she saw through the dust and bolts and into the parts of him he'd long stopped claiming, made him reach for it. The lock clicked open, like it was surprised to still be useful. Inside were odds and ends, an old wrench from his first job, a faded photo of his dad leaning against a rusted-out Mustang, and beneath it all, folded 4 times, was the sketch, just a few lines on yellowing paper, the pencil strokes smudged from age. But it was still clear, the outline of a small building, half classroom, half garage. Above the door, scrawled in messy block letters, were the words Morgan School of Automotive Arts, a school for kids like he'd once been, hands too restless for a desk, hearts too quiet for a lecture hall, a place to learn more than engines, a place to be seen. He laid it flat on the desk and stared, feeling equal parts foolish and alive. The next day, Malene stopped by with coffee and a packet of invoices. Just another check-in, just another afternoon, until she saw the paper. "What's that?" she asked, setting the coffee down and leaning closer. Jake hesitated. Old dream, buried dream. She traced the edge of the sketch with one finger. "You drew this?" "Yeah, years ago. Figured if I ever made it out of the red, I'd build something that lasted. Something for the kids in town who aren't gonna make it to college but know how to turn a wrench." Malene looked up at him, eyes steady. "Why didn't you?" Jake shrugged. "Life, money, fear. Take your pick." She was quiet for a beat, then said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Let's do it." He blinked. "You serious?" "I'll fund it. Full startup. You design it. Build the team. Make it yours." He stared at her, stunned. "Why?" Malene smiled. "Because this is bigger than a garage, and because the world needs more people who fix things the right way, starting with each other." And just like that, an old dream didn't feel foolish anymore. It felt possible. The shop smelled like brake fluid and tension. It was a Thursday just after lunch, when Malene called everyone into the main bay. The lifts were quiet. The tools were down. Jake stood off to the side, arms crossed, trying to keep his face unreadable. He didn't know what she was up to. All she'd said that morning was, "Trust me." Now, with the crew circled in a loose half-moon around her, she stepped forward like a teacher about to break a rule. "I'm not big on titles," she began, voice steady, "but I am big on trust, and I believe Jake Morgan has earned mine. But I know change is hard. I know some of you have doubts, so today we're doing something simple." She held up a small cardboard box, makeshift, honest. Bree passed out slips of paper and pens. One question, one vote. Should Jake stay on as manager? No pressure, no names, just honesty. The room went still. Even the humming from the old ceiling fan seemed to pause. Dennis looked down at his paper like it might bite him. Miguel rubbed the back of his neck. Bree wrote her answer without flinching. Mark didn't move. Jake's pulse thudded in his ears. This was it. Not a review, not an owner's decree. His fate in the hands of the people who'd seen him at his best, and at his most uncertain. They dropped the papers in the box one by one, folded, silent like prayers or confessions. When the last one hit the bottom, Malene gave it a gentle shake and handed it to Bree. Bree counted out loud. Yes, 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 yes. No. She paused, looked at Jake, then kept going. Yes, yes. In the end, only one no, Mark. Everyone knew, but no one said it. Jake felt something tight inside him, ease just slightly. Not pride, not relief. Something quieter, like permission. Malene closed the box, gave him a small nod, and said to the room, "Then it's settled." Jake didn't speak, just looked around at the faces he knew, the ones who had watched him fail, stumble, grow. They had chosen, not out of obligation, but out of belief. And for the first time since taking the title, he believed in himself too. It went up on a crisp morning, just as the sun broke through the haze that hung low over Maple Hollow. A ladder leaned against the building, the old sign, a weathered relic that read, "Halverson's Repair," already taken down and laid gently in the back of the lot, like an aging veteran, retired with respect. Jake stood below, arms folded, coffee cooling in his hand. Bree was beside him, grinning more than she usually allowed herself to. Dennis leaned on a tire stack, pretending not to care, but watching every inch. Even Miguel had shown up early, phone out, snapping photos like it was the 4th of July. The cover tarp came off slow, deliberate, like a curtain rising on something that mattered. Morgan's Auto, clean white lettering on brushed steel. Underneath, in smaller script that looked like it belonged there all along, "Driven by Trust." No tagline, no flashy logo, and nowhere, not on the front, not on the corner, not in the footnotes, was Malene's name. Jake swallowed hard. He hadn't asked for it. Malene hadn't asked his permission either, but somehow she knew exactly what it needed to say. After it was unveiled, she appeared from around the corner, holding 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for him. "You like it?" she asked, handing it over. Jake stared at the sign, then at her. "You left your name off." She shrugged. "Because this isn't about me." "But it was your money." She sipped her coffee. "Sure, but you're the reason people walk in. You're the reason they come back. This place reflects the hands that built it, not the wallet that funded it." Jake nodded slowly, emotion thick in his throat. He didn't know how to say thank you, not in a way that would do it justice. So he just said, "I'll take care of it." Malene smiled. "I know." That afternoon, cars came in as usual. The crew moved in rhythm. The tools sang their usual song. But above the door, in the quiet between customers, a new truth stood tall. This was no longer a shop living in someone else's shadow. This was Jake's now, and everyone in town would know exactly what it stood for. The envelope was thick, official, with the county seal stamped in gold on the front and Jake's name written in bold, block letters. It showed up on a Monday, tucked neatly into the shop's mailbox between a parts catalog and an overdue invoice. Bree handed it to him while chewing on a pen cap, her eyebrows already raised in curiosity. Jake opened it absent-mindedly, still thinking about the transmission he needed to rebuild by noon. But the moment he unfolded the letter, the world around him narrowed. The words stared back at him like a secret finally ready to speak. "Congratulations. You've been selected as the recipient of the 2024 Community Enrichment Grant in the amount of $100,000 for your proposed project, Morgan School of Automotive Arts." He blinked, then blinked again. Bree?" he muttered, eyes still on the page. "What?" she said, then caught the look on his face. "You okay?" He handed her the letter without a word. She read it, jaw slowly dropping. "You applied for this?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "No, I didn't even know it existed." That night, he confronted Malene, not with anger, just a dazed kind of awe. "You applied in my name?" he asked, holding up the letter, like it was both proof and mystery. Malene didn't pretend to be surprised. She just smiled. "You told me about the school, about the kids you wanted to teach, the way you wanted to give back. You had the vision, Jake. I just filled out a few forms." $100,000 isn't a few forms, he said. No, she agreed. But it's the least the county could do for someone building something real. He stared at her, heart thudding in a way that had nothing to do with shock anymore. "You did this behind my back." She shrugged. "Sometimes people need someone to believe in them before they believe in themselves." Jake looked down at the grant again, fingers curling gently around the paper. This wasn't just funding. This was the door he'd forgotten how to knock on, now open, wide and waiting. And she'd been holding the key the whole time. The fair arrived like it always did, without warning, without fuss. Just one morning, posters showed up on telephone poles, and the smell of funnel cakes drifted in on the breeze. By sundown, Maple Hollow's field was alive with string lights, music, and the hum of old carnival rides trying to outlast their years. Jake hadn't planned to go. He told himself he was too tired, too busy, too something. But when Malene showed up outside the garage, holding 2 tickets, and wearing a flannel shirt that made her look more like a local than a CEO, he didn't stand a chance. They walked through rows of booths, laughing at the games rigged beyond hope. Jake lost $3 trying to win her a stuffed bear. She beat him at ring toss, then gave the prize to a toddler with chocolate on his face. They didn't talk about the shop, didn't talk about the school or grants or what came next. Just music, the way the air smelled like buttered popcorn and dirt, and how her laugh sounded more like a memory than a sound. As the sun dipped low and the lights took over the sky, they found themselves standing in front of the Ferris wheel. Malene raised an eyebrow. "You scared of heights?" she asked. Jake smirked. "Only when I'm falling." The ride creaked and groaned as they climbed into the cart, and when it jerked upward, Jake instinctively reached for the bar. Malene noticed, said nothing, just leaned back and looked at the stars blooming above them. At the top, the wheel paused, just for a moment, just long enough for the world below to fade into soft, quiet hush. She turned to him. "I'm not very good at slowing down." Jake nodded. "Me neither." Then, after a breath, "But I think I could be with the right person." He looked at her. Her eyes reflected the sky, but her gaze was steady, grounded. "Are you saying that to charm me?" she asked, smiling. "No," Jake said. "I'm saying it because for the first time in a long time, I want something that isn't just mine. I want something shared, real." Malene didn't answer with words, just reached over, fingers finding his, steady and sure. Below, the music played, the wheel turned, and above it all, under the stars, neither of them was pretending anymore. He showed up in a car that didn't belong in Maple Hollow. Black, silent, and so polished it made the dusty lot outside Morgan's Auto look like a film set for a different kind of story. The man who stepped out was tall, smooth-jawed, and dressed in a suit that screamed money in the quietest possible way. Jake was under the hood of a Chevy when the door opened. "Excuse me," the man said, voice clipped like a tailored edge. "I'm looking for Malene Sinclair." Jake straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's not here right now. Can I help you?" The man tilted his head, scanned Jake from boots to collar. "No, I don't think you can." The tension in the air shifted, sharp, clean, measured. He didn't introduce himself, but he didn't have to. Malene walked in 5 minutes later, saw the car, then him, and froze, just for a breath. But Jake saw it. "Logan," she said, her voice flat, polished, the kind she used with people she didn't trust. "Malene," he replied, stepping closer. "I thought it was time we talked, in person." Jake stood back, but not far. She didn't look at him, not yet. Logan gestured toward the shop with a smirk. "This is where you've been hiding? Playing mechanic's assistant?" "I'm not hiding," she said, "and I'm not playing anything." "I miss you," Logan said simply, like they were in a boardroom, like they were negotiating a merger instead of a memory. "Come back. This, whatever this is, doesn't have to be your story." Her eyes flicked to Jake then, just briefly. Logan followed her gaze. Ah, so that's what this is. Jake didn't flinch, but he felt the hit, like a wrench thrown in slow motion. You're better than this, Logan continued, and we both know you don't belong in a town like this. Not really. Maline's jaw tightened. I belong where I choose to be. Logan smiled, practiced and sharp. Then choose wisely. He left without another word, the car disappearing in a trail of quiet arrogance. Jake didn't ask her what it meant. He just stood beside her in the silence that followed, the smell of oil and old paint grounding them both. But deep inside, a voice he didn't want to hear whispered, "What if he's right?" Jake had never felt small in his own shop, until now. Not when the roof leaked, not when bills piled up, not even when he burned his hands trying to save a customer's engine in the dead of winter. But after Logan's visit, after watching Maline stand between two worlds with that unreadable look in her eyes, the walls that had always grounded him suddenly felt like they were closing in. He didn't say much the next day, just kept his head down, hands busy, heart heavier than the socket wrench in his grip. Every smile from Maline felt distant. Every shared glance was quieter, less certain. And when she asked him to stay late and talk, he already knew how the night would end. They sat outside the shop, where the stars were softer and the crickets carried on like nothing had changed. She offered him a coffee he didn't touch. He offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I saw the way you looked at him," Jake said finally, voice low. Maline didn't blink. "It wasn't the look you think." "But it was a look," he said, "and it made me realize something." She waited. "You don't belong here," he said, forcing the words out like they were stuck to his chest. "You never did?" "Not really." "Jake?" He held up a hand. "I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I've been fixing things my whole life, Maline. Wrenches, engines, messes. But I can't fix the gap between our worlds." She looked at him like she wanted to close the space with a breath, but he stood first. "You deserve someone who lives in your world," he said, "not someone who keeps wondering if he's good enough to stand beside you in it." Her eyes were glassy now, lips parted, words caught somewhere between protest and heartbreak. Jake turned toward the darkened garage, the place that had always made sense. He stopped once, glanced back. "I meant everything I said," he whispered. "Every moment with you was real." Then he walked away, each step louder than the last. And behind him, under a quiet sky, Maline stood still, like the world had tilted, and she hadn't decided yet whether to chase after him or let him go. The next morning, the garage was unusually still. Jake was in early, earlier than normal even for him. He kept himself busy, which was code for keeping his thoughts quiet. He didn't talk about what happened, didn't mention Logan, didn't mention her. He'd decided. He was going to finish out the week, hand things off cleanly, and step back into the background where he felt steady, where life was simpler, smaller, controllable. Then the door opened, not the front office door, not the customer bell, the side bay door, the one mechanics used. She walked in wearing jeans, a faded T-shirt, and a pair of boots that looked too new for her, but already smudged with grease. Her hair was tied up, no red coat, no elegance, just a quiet fire in her eyes that told Jake everything before she even said a word, and he straightened, breath caught halfway between bracing and disbelief. "I thought you left," he said. Maline smiled, soft, not triumphant. "I thought about it." Jake wiped his hands on a rag, unsure if he was about to say something brave or something stupid. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said. "You don't have to get dirty to stay." She stepped closer. "I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here because this is where I want to be, not the boardroom, not beside someone who calls life a portfolio." She held up her hands, grease-stained from working on something before she arrived. "I got up early and helped Miguel change a distributor cap," she said. "Terribly, by the way." Jake blinked, stunned into a crooked smile. "I don't want Logan's world," she continued, "or his skyline view. I want this. The town that still waves when they pass. The team that cracks jokes during oil changes. The man who refuses to charge a single mom because it's the right thing to do. Jake looked at her, the woman who could have had anything, and chose a world with rusted tools and honesty. She stepped even closer. You once told me you didn't belong in my world, but I've been in both, and the truth is, your world is the one I've been looking for. Jake didn't respond with words. He dropped the rag, took her face gently in his hands, and kissed her like he finally believed the impossible had found him. Because she wasn't just choosing the garage, she was choosing him. The new sign sat beside the old one now, polished, wooden, hand-carved letters that read, Morgan School of Automotive Arts. Below it, in smaller script, learn with your hands, lead with your heart. The garage still stood next door, still bustling with the hum of tools and the familiar scent of oil and ambition, but it was no longer just a repair shop. It was a starting point. Every fall, a new group of students rolled in, kids who didn't quite fit into textbooks, who talked more with their hands than their mouths, who felt more at home under a hood than behind a desk. Jake remembered that feeling. It's why he built the place. Malene sat in the front row during orientation every year. No clipboard, no title, just the same steady presence she'd brought into his life, like a storm that chose to stay. She taught one class a week, business ethics in the real world, and the students listened because she never pretended. She told them what she'd learned the hard way, and when they found out she used to run an empire, they didn't believe it. Because she wore jeans now and laughed louder. Jake still worked the garage 3 days a week, still got grease on his collar and under his nails. But now he had help. Miguel ran diagnostics. Bree handled admin like a general with a calendar. Dennis, retired now, still dropped by with donuts and complaints about how soft these kids are. And on weekends, Jake walked the school shop floor, watching students tear apart their first engines with the same reckless wonder he'd once had. He smiled when they got frustrated, nodded when they figured it out, and stayed quiet long enough for them to realize they already had what it took. Sometimes when the day ended and the sun dropped behind the old maple trees out back, Malene would find him leaning against the hood of an old project car, same way he had the day they met. "You still fixing things?" she'd ask. "Every day," he'd say. "But now they fix me too." And when people passed through town and asked about the sign, about the story behind it, the locals would smile and say, "Funny thing, it all started when he let a stranger cut the line."